Chapter 14. Promise we won't be separated. Thursday afternoon, the 31st of August, 1939. Rosie was in the clearing when Tilly arrived and called out in an excited voice, "Look! Our very first code message, and you wouldn't believe who I met on the high street." She waved the paper, but Rosie didn't answer. Tilly could see her face was very pale as she dropped her bike in the grass. There were two bright red points on Rosie's cheeks, as if she had a fever. "I told Megan," Rosie said in a quavery voice. "I had to, but I couldn't stop crying." "About the emergency zoo?" "No, of course not," I said. "I hadn't quite told the truth about Tinkerbell, and that I'd hidden her in the bushes near the canal and she'd died and we'd buried her. But oh, Tilly, we're in such trouble." "What do you mean?" Megan asked me 3 times exactly where I hid Tinks, and I got in such a muddle. But then she said she knew where children were hiding pets in the old factories. Tilly gasped. "That's what Dad said too. It's the rumour going round. But if they start to believe it, how long before they find the hut? It's only a few minutes away across the field." She felt that awful chill down her spine again. First, Connor finds the hideout and threatens to give us away, and now the grown-ups are closing in on us. How can we put them off the scent? It's much worse than even that," hiccuped Rosie between sobs. "Megan told me that she wouldn't let me be evacuated with the high school. She says Mummy wouldn't want us to be separated if there was a war." Her voice broke and her face looked absolutely distraught as tears rolled down her cheeks. Tilly was so shocked that she felt her legs turn toward her. It was as if a bomb had dropped between them, opening a huge hole, separating them forever. But, she stammered, "can't you make Megan change her mind? What about Donald?" Rosie brushed her tears from her cheeks and said, "Donald didn't even give me his secret wink. I begged and pleaded until Megan got so furious with me she nearly dropped the teapot." Rosie fixed her green eyes filled with anguish on Tilly and she said, "I want to be with you in the war, not with Megan. You're the only person in the whole wide world who really understands me. Tilly, now Mummy and Daddy are gone. We've got to stay together, haven't we?" "Of course, nothing will ever separate us. It's possibly unthinkable. We're going to make the grown-ups send us away together." Rose's sobs calmed a bit and she said, "I feel as though I'm losing all my friends. First Tinkerbell and now you. There's no one left." Tilly leant over and patted her arm in desperation. "I'll come up with a plan." But as she stared across the woods, a crow flapping slow and black between the trees, she felt empty of all inspiration. All she could do was try to cheer Rosie up a bit to take her mind off the impending doom. Tilly pushed her hair back from her face. "Well, what about Tinkerbell's sign?" she said. "Did you make one?" Rosie wiped her eyes and with the end of her cardigan and then pointed to a flat parcel in her bike basket wrapped with brown paper and tied with string. "I stayed up till really late doing it by torchlight under the blankets." "Well done. Let's sort out the pets then and put them up." Rosie gave a nod and then Alec came out carrying the tank. He set it down on the grass, pushed the lid aside and peered into it. "Fred is dead," he said in a subdued voice. Tilly could see Rosie's mouth drop again as she thrust Lottie's bag of scraps towards her and said, "Here, go and feed our pets." She made sure she said "our" in a clear voice and Rosie went off inside the hut. "She didn't look too happy," said Alec. "Her cat died last night and we buried her this morning. I'm so sorry about Freddie." Alec gave a shrug. "Don't worry. I ain't going to blubber. He was a good little chap." "Don't you want to bury him, like next to Tinkerbell?" "Nah, it's all right. I'll sort him." Alec picked up the stiff corpse, wrapped it in a piece of sacking, and pushed his way through the thicket. Tilly went off to release Bonnie, who jumped up at her, licking her hand with great joy as usual. Hannah perked up too, but when he saw no sign of Rudy, he dropped back down on his belly, his sad eyes looking up at Tilly. Then Pirate gave a loud squawk and tapped his beak on the bars of the cage. Hanno pricked up his ears and gave a loud yap back. "What are they saying, Bonnie?" said Tilly. But Bonnie ran out of the back of the hut with a loud woof as if to say, "Come on, let's play." Tilly followed and spotted Rosie kneeling down at Tinkerbell's grave. "Shall we put up the sign now?" she called out, walking over. "I've done it," said Rosie. "Oh," said Tilly, felt a bit hurt Rosie hadn't asked her to help. The sign was tied to the bottom of the cross with a length of black velvet ribbon. Rosie's best ribbon, meant for church, Tilly noticed, and she wondered what Megan would say. On the sign, Rosie had painted a picture of Tinkerbell and written in red paint, "To my best friend in the sweetest little cat in the world, Tinker Bell Wilson, 6th of May, 1935 to the 30th of August, 1939. They stood and looked at the sign in silence for a few moments, and then Rosie stepped away from Tinker Bell's grave and bent down to pull a tiny weed from the fresh earth. With shoulders quite drooped, she wandered off back to the hut, muttering, "Better feed the little pets." Tilly took Bonnie off for a drink at the stream, partly because she didn't know what else to do for her friend, and partly because there were so many things to think about and she hardly knew where to start. As Bonnie rummaged around the edge of the stream, Tilly tried to sort everything out in her head. They were running out of food and she was going to have to think of something soon, or the animals would start to slowly starve. Already, when she picked up Bonnie for a cuddle, she was sure her ribs were sticking out more than usual. They had no one to look after the zoo yet, and now the biggest disaster of all, Rosie wasn't allowed to be evacuated. Right, first things first, she told herself. I'll ask Alec at the next possible moment to take over the zoo next week when we leave. But sorting out Rosie's evacuation, that seemed an insurmountable problem, and she had no idea where to start. As she arrived back in the clearing, Bonnie trotted ahead. A call called out from the edge of the thicket. "Hello!" Tilly spun round to see Sophia pulling some brambles out of her hair, and Neville standing looking worried, hands in his pockets. "She said the password, Papa Tills," said Neville, with hands in his pocket, eyes fixed on the ground as if he was expecting Tilly to yell at him. "What's she doing here?" shouted Miles, dropping out of the tree, following by Sydney. "She'll give us away," said Sydney, glowering towards Sophia. "Is your mum with you on her horsey?" said Miles, sniggering. Sophia was pulling a rope, and suddenly a very grumpy-looking goat burst through the bushes. It had a long beard and 2 pointed horns. "Come on, Horace," moaned Sophia. She tugged and tugged. The goat had come to a complete standstill and wouldn't budge. Sophia sounded close to tears. She was wearing her riding outfit and her cream jodhpurs and streaked with mud and brambles from the thicket. Sophia brushed her forehead with the back of her hand and said, "Please help. I don't know who else to ask." "How did you find us?" asked Rosie, who had come out of the hut, Toffee in her arms. Tilly tried to meet her eye, but Rosie was staring off into the distance again. The guinea pig snuffed into her jumper and then twitched his dear little nose in the air. But Rosie didn't seem to notice how endearing he looked this morning. Tilly gave an inward sigh. "I saw Tilly on the high street." Sophia's voice faded away and she ran a hand through her blonde hair, which was blowing in a tangle around her face. "I gave her the password," said Tilly. She reddened a bit when she saw the boys exchange looks. "We can't trust her," said Miles. "She's a right snob, and her horses and her mum called us urchins." "I'm so sorry," murmured Sophia. "Look," said Tilly, "I don't think Sophia has to be like her mum, does she? Are we all exactly like our parents?" The boys mumbled under their breaths, but no one challenged her. "It's Horace," Sophia blurted out, taking advantage of the pause. "Daddy said he has to be put down. He's sending the horses down to Aunt Edith's in Sussex next week. She's got lots of stables and outhouses and things. But he says Horace is useless. You can't even eat him. He's so old." She gave a little sob, and Tilly almost put an arm around to comfort her. "Horace has arthritis, poor old dear. But I don't give 2 hoots about their stupid war if I can't protect Horace." "Why can't your auntie take the goat then?" said Sydney. Sophia shook her head. "She went back to Sussex this morning, and Daddy only told me at lunch. I rode all the way here on Misty, and poor Horace had to walk. It's miles and miles." "What do you think?" Tilly said, looking round at the others. "She said the password," muttered Neville, and Miles gave a shrug. Tilly turned back to Sophia. "Now look here," she said. "You agree to our rules, and you swear on Horace's life you will never betray us." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, yes, I swear. I'm so grateful to you." Tilly looked round at the cobras, and then she said, "All right, then, you're in." "Oh, thank you so much," said Sophia. "And I brought this." She lowered a knapsack as she had on her back and pulled out a huge paper bag. Opening it, she showed it to them. "Whoopee!" cried Miles. "That's enough food for the weekend. Horace can eat grass, can't he?" "I suppose so," said Sophia, as she tied Horace up. Horace tried to butt her with his fierce-looking horns, and she patted his nose and spoke to him in a quiet voice until he calmed down. "We'd better feed the pets and clear them out," said Tilly. She went over to Rosie and whispered, "I haven't forgotten, Rose. I promised, didn't I?" Rosie didn't even turn to meet her eyes, but she shrugged and walked off into the hut. Sophia joined them, exclaiming, "Goodness, do you do all this yourselves? Look at those gorgeous guinea pigs. Who made their cages?" The Scudder boys seemed to warm up after all the compliments and proudly showed her the hinged lids that they had made. Soon Sophia was picking up pets, feeding them and cleaning out the dirty bedding. Running in and out of the clearing, she pulled out huge armfuls of grass and made it fresh beds for the small pets. Tilly tried to get Rosie interested in the baby hamsters. "Why don't you sit here and cuddle them for a bit?" she said gently, pushing Rosie over to a crate, settling her down with the babies on her lap, and found some nice pieces of lettuce from Sophia's supply to feed them. The hamsters were quite delightful, one brown and one piebald, with the softest coats and pink ears. They seemed to like lettuce, snuffling around and taking tiny bites. Tilly was enchanted and had to keep Bonnie back as she kept thrusting her nose towards Rosie's lap. "No, Bonnie, honestly, you've just eaten them up," she cried out, trying to catch Rosie's eye and making her laugh. But Rosie didn't seem to take any notice. A totally dejected look was always on her face now. Sophia called out, "I must go. Mummy doesn't like me to ride off on my own. I'll be in for it if I'm late home too. But thank you so much, everyone, and I'll be back in the morning to help out again. It's such fun here. I think you're all absolutely marvellous." With a wave, she was gone, and Miles said, "She's all right, I suppose." "Course she is," said Sydney. Tilly grinned at them and said, "I think it's time for us to go too. We'd better double-check all the cages are properly closed for the night." She tied up both dogs, having given Hanno some freedom to run around. Hanno and Bonnie had become firm friends and were now sleeping next to each other. Hanno's long brown nose resting on Bonnie's back. Bonnie still whined when Tilly left, but it was a comfort to know that she had a friend to keep her warm at night. Tilly popped the tortoise back in his box. Pirate tapped his beak against the cage and Hanno yapped back. Even Bonnie gave a woof, and all the pets seemed to be making friends with each other. The Scudders and Mars had disappeared by the time she was satisfied everyone was safe for the night. Rosie was all right, already mounting her bike, and didn't speak at all as they cycled home. They parted on the corner, and Tilly arrived home more worried than she ever had about her friend. As she lay in bed that night, her legs missing Bonnie's warmth even more than their night together in the hut, she knew she only had a few days to sort out the emergency zoo and find a way to persuade the grown-ups to let Rosie join her in the evacuation.